The silence of my apartment was heavy, the kind of quiet that only exists in the middle of a Tuesday night when the rest of the world is dreaming. It was exactly 11:57 p.m. when the sudden, sharp vibration of my phone against the wooden nightstand made me jump. I reached for it, squinting against the harsh glare of the screen. It was my mother. My heart did a nervous little flutter because she never called this late unless something was wrong. When I answered, her voice was eerily calm, yet there was an underlying urgency that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Avril, honey, I'm sorry to wake you, but we really need to talk about your accounts," she said. She didn't say which accounts or why. Just that one sentence. I sat up in bed, my feet hitting the cold floor, as a wave of dread washed over me. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. I had a sinking feeling that the calm in her voice was just a thin mask for a much larger chaos that was about to erupt. I asked her what she meant, but she just told me to check my email and hung up. "My name is Avril Firgit, and I am 28 years old. For the last 10 years, I have worked myself to the bone as a financial analyst, a job that requires me to be precise, organized, and logical. While my peers were out traveling or buying first homes, I was the invisible pillar holding my family together. I have been silently supporting my parents and my younger sister for nearly a decade, covering everything from their rising rent to my sister's expensive college tuition. I never complained because I thought that was what a good daughter did. I took pride in my quiet resilience, believing that my hard work was the safety net that kept them from falling into poverty. I lived in a small, modest apartment and drove an old car just so I could send home 60% of my paycheck every single month. I thought we were a team, and I thought they respected the sacrifices I was making to keep our family name out of the red. I didn't realize that my generosity had become a tool for my own slow, methodical imprisonment. With my mother's cryptic words echoing in my head, I opened my laptop. The blue light felt blinding in the dark room. I logged into my personal email, and my stomach dropped through the floor. My inbox was flooded with notifications from credit card companies and utility providers I didn't even use. There were several bills totaling thousands of dollars that were significantly in arrears. Bills I had never authorized and didn't even know existed. I clicked through the attachments, my hands shaking so hard I could barely track the cursor. I looked at the account details for the primary holders, and my breath stopped. The contact information and the secondary addresses didn't match any of my records. It was my name on the top of the documents, but the phone numbers and recovery emails belonged to my parents. A creeping, icy panic began to rise from my chest, threatening to choke me. But the analyst in me took over. I steeled myself, forcing my mind to stop screaming and start looking at the data. This wasn't a mistake. It was a trail of breadcrumbs leading somewhere very dark. I didn't call my mother back. I didn't scream or cry. Instead, I did what I do best. I began a quiet, clinical investigation. I pulled up every bank statement, every credit report, and every transaction I had ever covered for them over the last decade. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and started a master log. I went back years, documenting the mortgage payments I'd covered when my father said he was short, the insurance premiums for my sister's car, and the endless utility bills. Each entry became a piece of evidence in a trial I hadn't realized I was preparing for. I realized that my family hadn't just been asking for help. They had been treating my income as their own personal slush fund. As the sun began to peek through my blinds, I had a digital mountain of proof. The sheer volume of money I had funneled into their lives was staggering, yet they were still opening new lines of credit in my name. I felt like I was looking at the blueprint of a long-term heist where I was the only victim. As I stared at the numbers, I started to reflect on our family patterns, seeing them clearly for the first time without the fog of duty. I thought about my younger sister, the golden child, who always seemed to have the latest clothes and gadgets, while I wore the same coat for 4 winters. She had an air of entitlement that I had always mistaken for youthful confidence. Then there was my mother, the master of the subtle guilt trip, who could make me feel like a monster if I didn't loan them an extra $500 for an emergency that never quite made sense. And finally, my father, the man of passive avoidance. He would simply look at the floor whenever money was mentioned, letting my mother do the dirty work while he benefited from the comfort my money provided. They had built a perfect system of manipulation. They knew I was the responsible one, the one who would always say yes to keep the peace. They had used my best qualities, my loyalty, and my hard work as weapons against me, turning my love into a leash. The spreadsheet on my screen continued to grow, row after row of numbers that told the story of my life's work being siphoned away. I organized it meticulously, color-coding the various types of help I had provided. Every favor, every supposed one-time emergency, and every late-night phone call that ended with a tearful, "Thanks, Avril, you saved us again," was there. I added up the totals for the last 3 years alone and felt a physical pang in my heart. The number was enough to have paid off my own student loans and started a retirement fund. Instead, it had gone into a black hole of my family's irresponsibility. Looking at the final sum, I realized with a haunting clarity that I had been silently enslaved by my own generosity. I wasn't their daughter or their sister. I was their interest-free bank. I was a resource to be managed, not a person to be loved. The thanks they gave me weren't expressions of gratitude. They were the words used to keep the tap running. I was deep into the digital archives of my sister's university portal, trying to figure out why her tuition bills were still coming to my email, when I found the first major twist. I pulled up a PDF of a tuition deferment form from last semester. At the bottom of the page was a signature line. My name was printed clearly, but the signature next to it wasn't mine. It was a fluid, practiced script that looked strikingly similar to my own handwriting, but with subtle differences in the loops of the A and the L. I felt a jolt of electricity run through my spine. It wasn't just that they were using my money, they were actively impersonating me. I had never signed this form. I had never agreed to take on this specific debt. Someone in my house had sat down, taken a pen, and practiced my name until they could forge it well enough to fool a clerk. The betrayal moved from financial greed to a calculated, criminal deception that left me feeling physically sick. I needed to be absolutely sure before I made my next move. I waited until 9 a.m. and called the college's financial aid office. I used my professional voice, the one that gets things done. I asked them to verify the signature on the most recent financial aid documents. The clerk on the other end confirmed that the authorization for third-party billing had been signed in person at their office 3 months ago. I was in another state 3 months ago. "Yes, Miss Firgit, the signature matches the one we have on file for your primary authorization," she said cheerfully. My blood ran cold. The signature wasn't mine, yet it was their gold standard for my identity. It was official. Someone had been forging my name to secure funds and credit for years. The shock I felt initially began to mix with a cold, hard sense of betrayal. This wasn't a desperate mistake. It was a long-term plan to use my identity as a shield for their spending. My first instinct was to drive home and scream until my lungs gave out, but I knew that wouldn't help. Instead of a messy confrontation, I began strategizing like I was handling a corporate merger gone wrong. I contacted a legal consultant specializing in identity theft and fraud. I needed to know exactly where I stood. I didn't tell my family I was doing this. I kept my movements completely silent. I began to document everything even more carefully than before. Every bill, every forged receipt, and every recorded call was archived and backed up in 3 different cloud locations. I moved my primary savings to a completely new bank that my family had no history with. I changed every single password I owned. I was building a fortress, and I was doing it while they still thought I was their obedient little ATM. I realized that to win this, I couldn't be their daughter. I had to be their adversary. A few days later, I decided to test their reactions. I wanted to see if they would lie to my face. I called my parents and casually mentioned that I had received a weird late utility notice for their house in my mail. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then my mother's voice came back, higher in pitch than usual, fluttering with a forced laugh. She claimed it must be a system error, and told me not to worry about it, saying they would handle it. I could hear my father whispering in the background, his voice tight with anxiety. I noticed a subtle, chilling pattern. Their calm, loving exterior only fractured when the word accountability was implied. They didn't ask how I was, they only cared about whether I was going to look closer at the bill. It was the confirmation I needed. They weren't just taking from, they were terrified of being caught, which meant they knew exactly how wrong their actions were. I moved into a phase of layered escalation. I didn't do anything loud, but I began systematically ensuring that every shared account was either transferred into their names or closed entirely. I contacted the utility companies and informed them that I was no longer a resident at that address and provided my parents' direct contact info for all future billing. I did the same with the insurance providers. Every action I took was methodical, quiet, and undeniably justified by the law. I wasn't cutting them off in a fit of rage. I was simply removing my name from legal liabilities I had never truly agreed to. It felt like I was slowly untying knots that had been tightening around my neck for a decade. Each closed account felt like a breath of fresh air. I knew they would start getting the final notice letters soon, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to rush in and fix it for them. As my changes started to take effect, small confrontations began to arise. My sister called me, complaining that her student perks on her credit card had suddenly stopped working. My mother sent an email about a misfiled payment for the mortgage that was causing the bank to call the house. Each of these interactions became a mini cliffhanger in the drama of our lives. I kept my responses short and professional. "I'm not sure why that's happening, you should call the bank," I would say. I could feel the narrative momentum building. They were starting to realize that the safety net was fraying, but they couldn't figure out why. My sister's subtle anger began to flare up in our group chats, accusing me of being difficult lately. She was so used to me being the fixer that my sudden neutrality felt like an attack to her. I watched it all unfold from a distance, maintaining my resolve like a wall of stone. The situation took an even darker turn when a handwritten letter arrived at my apartment, forwarded from my parents' address. It was a signed authorization for a massive, 5-figure renovation loan for their kitchen, a payment I had never made, and a loan I had never applied for. I stared at the signature. It was the same forged script from the tuition forms, but this time it was on a legal loan document. This was no longer just about paying bills. This was intentional, high-level deception and financial fraud. They weren't just trying to survive, they were trying to upgrade their lifestyle at the expense of my entire credit future. The realization that my own parents would risk my career and my freedom for a granite countertop was the final straw. The story had deepened from a family dispute into a criminal matter. I took the letter to my lawyer immediately. The betrayal was no longer a wound, it was a scar that would never fade. I met with my attorney, a sharp woman who specialized in white-collar fraud. She went through my spreadsheet and the forged documents with a grim expression. "You've done everything right, Avril," she told me. "The fact that you documented everything before reacting protects you legally." She explained that because I had already begun separating my assets and reporting the inconsistencies, I was shielded from the debt they were trying to pile on me. The family had unknowingly built a foundation for my empowerment by being so blatant with their lies. I felt a surge of strength. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one with the power. I had the law, the logic, and the paper trail on my side. For years I thought I was weak because I couldn't say no. Now I realized that my ability to plan and endure was the very thing that was going to set me free and hold them accountable for their choices. My parents must have sensed that the tide was turning. They could feel the anticipatory panic setting in as their letters from creditors went unanswered by me. Suddenly, my inbox wasn't full of bills, but of frequent, pleading emails from my mother. Her tone had shifted from demanding to carefully polite, almost desperate. She wrote about how much they missed me and how stressed my father was about his health. It was a classic emotional play, a desperate attempt to pull me back into the cycle of guilt. But I had my spreadsheet open on the other screen, reminding me of the thousands of dollars they had stolen through forgery. I ignored the emotional manipulation. I didn't delete the emails, though. I saved them. Every "we love you" that was followed by a "can you just look at this one bill" was more evidence of their true motives. I remained a ghost in their machine. Watching them scramble to maintain a lifestyle I was no longer funding. The tension reached a boiling point when I received an alert on my phone. Someone was trying to change the recovery phone number on a joint savings account I had kept open with a small balance just to see what they would do. It was my sister. I intercepted the change immediately, locking the account and transferring the remaining balance to my private vault. My sister called me 10 minutes later, her voice shrill and shocked. She didn't even try to hide it. "Why did you lock me out?" "I needed that for my car payment," she yelled. For the first time, I didn't apologize. "That's my money, and you don't have permission to touch it," I said firmly. The silence on her end was profound. She was shocked because the old Avril was gone. The one she could steamroll was no longer there. I was finally asserting control, and the golden child had no idea how to handle a world where I said no. While I was digging through some old boxes of documents my mother had sent me years ago, another twist surfaced. I found an old tax document from 4 years prior. As I scanned it, I realized my mother had used my personal information and my contributions to claim massive deductions on their taxes that were completely fraudulent. She had basically lied to the government, using my identity to get a larger refund for themselves. The betrayal went deeper than I ever imagined. This wasn't just a recent lapse in judgment. This had been years in the making. They had been using me as a tax shield while I was struggling to pay my own rent. I felt a cold clarity. There was no fixing this relationship. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a parasitic bond where they were the predators and I was the prey. I added the tax document to the legal file. The mountain of evidence was now insurmountable. It was time for the first major confrontation. I didn't call them to argue. Instead, I sent a formal, factual, and incredibly calm letter to both of my parents and my sister. I attached a summarized version of my spreadsheet, detailing every single documented contribution I had made over the last decade. I also included copies of the forged signatures I had discovered. I didn't use emotional language. I simply stated the facts and requested a formal recognition of the debt and a plan for repayment of the forged amounts. I was ethical, firm, and completely professional. I told them that if they didn't agree to a structured repayment and a total cessation of using my identity, I would be forced to take legal action. The response was almost instantaneous. My mother sent a flurry of panicked texts, and I could tell the family was visibly shaken. The wall of lies they had lived behind was finally crumbling under the weight of the truth. The backlash was as ugly as I expected. My mother, seeing that her polite emails weren't working, pivoted to emotionally charged threats. She emailed me saying I was destroying the family and that she would tell everyone I was a cold-hearted daughter who was leaving her parents homeless. She tried to make me feel like the villain of the story. I didn't bite. I responded with total clarity, attaching more spreadsheets and keeping my tone neutral. "I am not leaving you homeless. I am asking you to pay for the debts you created in my name," I wrote. Every word I sent back reinforced the concept of accountability. I refused to engage in the drama. I treated her threats like junk mail, filing them away and sticking to the financial facts. The more she screamed, the more it proved that she had no logical defense for what they had done. I was the adult in the room, and she was a child throwing a tantrum because her favorite toy had been taken away. In the middle of this storm, I found an unexpected ally. I reached out to a childhood friend, a guy named Marcus, who is now a high-level accountant and a trusted mentor to me. I showed him my findings, worried that maybe I was being too harsh. Marcus spent 3 hours going over my records and the forged documents. He looked up at me, his face grim. "Avril, this isn't just family drama. This is serious fraud. You've actually been undercalculating what they owe you," he said. Having this third-party confirmation from someone I respected boosted my legitimacy and my confidence. It wasn't just in my head. I wasn't being mean. I was being a victim of a crime. Marcus helped me refine my repayment structure and provided a professional affidavit that I could use if we went to court. Knowing someone else saw the truth made me feel less alone in the world. I finally had someone in my corner who didn't want anything from. My sister tried one last tactic. She called me, her voice soft and trembling, feigning deep concern for my mental health. She suggested that maybe I was remembering things wrong because of the stress of my job. It was a classic gaslighting move, the final play of the golden child. But I wasn't the same girl she used to manipulate. I saw right through the fake concern and the shaky voice. I kept the call on speaker and recorded it, adding it to my evidence archive. As she spoke, I looked at the forged tuition form on my screen. The manipulation was now completely transparent to me, and I knew it would be to any audience as well. When she realized I wasn't falling for it, her voice turned cold and bitter. "You'll regret this, Avril," she hissed before hanging up. I didn't regret it. I felt a strange sense of relief. The last mask had fallen, and I finally saw her for who she really was. I decided to reach the peak of my escalation. I worked with my attorney to legally separate all remaining shared assets. I ensured that there was a legal block on my credit profile so that no one, not even with my social security number, could open an account without a 3-step verification process that went directly to my secure phone. I ensured the family could no longer touch a single penny of my finances. When the next round of bills hit their mailbox, bills for the car, the house, and the credit cards they had run up, they realized they were truly on their own. I could see their small panics through the desperate messages they left, and I'll admit, it felt like a visible reward for all the tension I had endured. For years, they had slept soundly while I worried about their debts. Now, the roles were reversed. I was the one sleeping peacefully, while they had to face the reality of their own irresponsibility. The emotional downfall for them was swift and inevitable. My parents finally realized that their control over me was gone forever. The bills they had relied on me to fix were no longer being covered, and the banks weren't as forgiving as I had been. They faced the consequences of their actions: collection calls, legal notices, and the looming threat of downsizing their lifestyle, without me needing to shout, cry, or even punish them personally. Justice was being delivered quietly, legally, and realistically by the very systems they had tried to cheat. I didn't feel joy in their suffering, but I felt a profound sense of balance. They were finally experiencing the weight of the lives they had chosen to lead. I hadn't done this to them. They had done it to themselves, and I had simply stopped standing in the way of the consequences. The silence from their end was no longer heavy. It was the sound of a problem that was no longer mine. I spent the next few months finalizing my new life. I moved out of my cramped apartment and found a small, sunlit place in a quiet part of town. It had big windows and a small balcony where I could grow herbs. For the first time in my adult life, I was debt-free, and my boundaries were firmly established. I sat on my new floor, surrounded by boxes, and realized I no longer carried a shred of guilt for my family's situation. They were adults, and they were responsible for their own choices. The payoff was more deeply satisfying than any paycheck I had ever received. I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I was Avril Firgit, a woman who had survived a decade of betrayal and come out the other side with her integrity and her future intact. I looked at my bank balance, my own balance, and smiled. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. On a quiet Sunday, I drove out to the cemetery to visit my grandmother's grave. She was the only one who had ever told me to look out for myself. I stood there for a long time, feeling the cool breeze on my face, reflecting on the journey from that 11:57 p.m. phone call to this moment of absolute autonomy. I leaned down and whispered to the headstone, "It's done." The weight of 10 years of manipulation and theft was finally gone. Peace, freedom, and a sense of true empowerment resonated within me. I walked back to my car, knowing that my family was left to manage their own lives, fully responsible for their own actions. I had paid my dues, in more ways than one. As I drove away, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I was too busy looking at the open road ahead, wondering what I would do with the rest of my life, now that it finally belonged to me. Please share your perspective, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that explore the complexities of the human